So I'm often asked the question, do professional guitar players need to be able to read music, and is learning to read music going to be beneficial for you in the long run as a guitar player? So in this video, I am going to dissect this big topic which has a lot of opinions within it from within the guitar industry, but hopefully this will give you some perspective and you can decide whether reading music or learning to read music is going to be beneficial for you. Now, to answer this question, we need to really dissect what people mean by being able to read music. So I think when most people imagine reading music, they're often thinking about sheet music. Let's take a pianist, for example, playing a piece on the piano and reading as they're playing. What they're typically reading is something that we refer to as standard notation. Now, this is a universal approach to documenting music in a way that is appropriate for most instruments. It's comprised of 5 horizontal lines, which we refer to as the staff, and then the lines and the spaces between the lines are where we would place our notes. Another way to think about this is that your x-axis is going to be time and your y-axis is going to be pitch. So all standard notation tells us is how the pitch of notes change over the time or the duration of a piece of music. Now, there's an incredibly fundamental issue with standard notation, which we're going to come back and have a look at a little bit later on. But what we also need to think about in this context is the other definitions of what reading music might entail in a musical situation. And this is where I think it is beneficial to learn to read music, but it might not be in the way that you're thinking. Now, all of this is a spectrum, right? It depends on the musical situation you're in, it depends on the genre or the style of music that you play, and it also depends on your journey as a guitar player and what you're interested in. I don't think learning to read music is ever going to be a bad thing, but if you're just trying to decide whether it's a priority or something that you really need to be investing a lot of time in, then I'm going to say probably not, and probably being the key word there. But I'm going to explain why based on my own experience. So I've been playing music professionally for over 10 years now, and that has encompassed a lot of different scenarios, from being a session musician, recording in the studio, playing with bands and touring, playing live, and from writing music and releasing my own music as an artist. And I've encountered a lot of different musicians from a lot of different genres, so I feel pretty well placed to document my experience as to where reading music has shown up in my trajectory as a musician so far. So to cut to the chase, I have not been asked to read standard notation in terms of what we were referring to earlier. I've not been asked to do that once in the whole 10 plus years that I've been playing guitar. For context, I typically play a lot of pop, rock, blues, Americana, bit of country, bit of folk, for example. All of these kind of genres of music where reading music is just not really a part of the culture in, those musical forms. A lot of the gigs that I get called to do are going to be, either sort of like rhythm guitar gigs where I'm reading chord charts. Learning to read music in that sense is quite important. Or I'm just being brought on to kind of like improvise or to sort of bring my own flavor to the project. And I think that's something that we as guitar players all probably want to strive towards, is, we want to be hired and we want to be playing the things that are very us, they're the things that are very synonymous with the way that we play, and that's going to be the thing that an artist or another musician is going to want on their songs. But traditionally speaking, the musical scenarios where being able to read standard notation is slightly more important is for things like, classical music or jazz, or if you're doing a lot of media composition or you're doing sort of scores for film where you're having to work with orchestral arrangements and you're having to think about different types of music and how they all sort of fit together in a very chronological and very uniform way. That's where you may come in to more scenarios where standard notation is going to help you. But again, I don't think it's a hard and fast rule of that being an essential requirement for being in those musical situations. Now, I've not had any sort of formal music education. I did have a few guitar lessons when I started, and I got a degree in music technology, but that was more in the production side of music, more so than the performance side. But I did, often come into contact with musicians, or I was often in scenarios where I needed to be able to read music, but it was never standard notation. It was things like being able to read tablature, which is just a way that I think most guitar music is documented and written, or I was having to read chord charts. Now, this is something that is very, very important in session work and in studio work, especially if you're learning other people's songs or you're just learning parts quickly to be able to record them. Quite often, if you're in the studio and you're tracking guitar, you will often just get a sheet of music put in front of you, and it will often just be a chord chart. It'll be written as bars, and then you'll have the names of the chords written out in, the chord names, i.e. letters, as opposed to actually in the standard notation form of writing chords. So you do need to be able to read music in the sense of, you need to be able to read and follow the chord changes, and charting, music is just something that I think is a very valuable thing to practice. If you're listening to a song at home or if you're practicing, just get a piece of paper and just write out, the progression, the arrangement, just so you get familiar with how that process works and how you can start to then practice following that over the course of a song. And that's obviously very applicable if you're predominantly a rhythm guitarist, but what if you're a lead guitarist where you're needing to play melodies or single note lines? And this is where the whole standard notation thing that I was referring to earlier starts to fall apart a little bit on the guitar. So let's take a piano, for example. It's a very distinct alineation of notes. You can't necessarily bend a note, and although you can hammer onto notes similar to how a guitar does, there's no real ability to manipulate pitch on a piano. And standard notation marries up really well to that instrument because, again, on your staff, when you're looking at all of your pitches, it's going to be pretty easy to decipher what octave you're playing at, because again, the pitch is just going to move from sort of top to bottom, like how a piano starts from the lowest note to the highest note. But a guitar isn't like that. There are multiple different places to play the same note on the guitar, and there's multiple different ways to play the same combination of notes on the guitar. The guitar is not linear from lowest to highest, so reading standard notation as a guitar player is something that I think for me would just feel very, very unintuitive. I think even in situations where standard notation is used by guitar players, I don't think it's ever really a case of just putting a sheet of music in front of a guitar player and just saying, play that. Quite often there's times where you will take that away and you will maybe study it, and it's more of a case of just reciting the piece and learning it as opposed to just sight reading it, because I think sight reading as a guitar player might detract from the performance because it's not that sort of fluid, and there's a lot of things that you need to deconstruct and I guess process when you're doing that. On guitar you also have bends, and you have microtonal bends, you have many pitches in between notes, and that again isn't easily portrayed in standard notation. So I don't think it's something that you're going to come across very frequently, and if you do come across it, it's more going to be as a tool to help you follow a piece of music as opposed to play a piece of music. And I preface all of this by saying that obviously my experience is very much my own, and I haven't been in every single musical situation, so do let me know in the comments if your experience has been different. But back to that point of playing single notes and having to learn melodies or riffs or hooks on the guitar, I've never been in a studio situation where it's been through standard notation that has been presented to me. Quite often if I'm playing on a song and say there is a part that needs to be written that is a bit more hooky, a bit more of a riff, then it's not going to be written out on standard notation. The common ways that we get around this is by having a good ear. For example, just through years and years of playing and just knowing theory on the guitar, if I hear a melody and I know sort of what key I'm in, then I can often quickly sort of pick out the notes, because it's often quite diatonic, meaning that all the notes are going to be within the key that the song is in. So if you're playing a pentatonic scale, whether it's major or minor, you're going to be in the ballpark pretty quickly. Although reading music is not essential, knowing all of your notes on the guitar are definitely going to be beneficial in that scenario, because say for example you've picked out a 5-note phrase that's going to be a lick, but what if the producer or the artist says, oh, can you, instead of playing G there, can you play A instead, for example? Then that kind of understanding of reading music and knowing music theory in terms of notation, that's going to be quite an important skill to develop, but it's never going to be written out. It's sometimes just very conversational and it's very off the cuff, and you just adapt and you improvise as you go on. And that's another important factor. Often in the studio when you're playing lead guitar, a lot of the scenarios I've been in have been born out of improvisation and being hired because of my ability to improvise, less because of my ability to be able to play something note for note. But I think if you're training your ear and you're able to read chord charts and you just have musicality and an understanding of music theory, I think that is probably going to be far more important than the ability to actually read music. So I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up, because I do think this is a topic that is often spoken about, but there's often, differing opinions as to the relevance and importance of this, and it does change over time. 50 years ago, standard notation was probably a lot more prevalent and a lot more relevant than it is today, so it's just an ever-evolving topic. But hopefully, talking about my experience has given you some insight and some perspective as to whether it's going to be important for you on your journey on the guitar. So, as always, thank you so much for watching this video. Like I said, I hope you did find it helpful and useful and interesting. And if you haven't already, do consider hitting that subscribe button and ringing the bell so you get notified of when new videos go live. Great way of supporting the channel, and I really, really appreciate it. As always, thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. I will see you all in the next video.